So a quick, we'll try to take like my 50-minute lecture on the Electoral College. I actually can give a 50-minute lecture on the Electoral College and reduce it down to 15. But trying to go over, what is it? Why do we have it? There's not really an easy answer to that. How does it work today? And then maybe briefly some recent proposals for reform. The national popular vote idea is, there's been, at least in the last 10 years, a couple of other proposals that got a little bit of traction, but this one's got the most. Maybe we'll put it in the context of some of the others. So what is it? As I mentioned before, I'm putting my watch here. It's a federal constitutional compromise to produce an indirect election of the president. And maybe to put this in the context of 1787 when the Constitution's being drafted, this probably wasn't one of the bigger worries of the Constitutional Convention, in part because I think everybody knew who the president was going to be right off, and also because it wasn't really understood what the role of the executive was going to be. So the selection of that executive, except for maybe people like Alexander Hamilton, the idea that we'd have a strong executive and that there would be substantial concern about how it would be selected, this is more something for the Committee on Unresolved Matters to deal with, almost literally. But I don't want to be too trivial about this, but it's a constitutional compromise that results from this, like a lot of things in the Constitution, where the big state interest, small state interest, protecting state interests, and the mathematics are sort of interesting. If you look at, we talk about small states, it wasn't so overt then, but as it became overt later, that it's also kind of a slave state. States that subsequently not become slave states, protecting the interest of these smaller states that were less populated. Even if you counted slaves as 3/5 of population, there was a substantial disadvantage for a lot of these smaller southern states that are equalized when everybody gets essentially 3 more votes in the Electoral College. But I don't think even that was all that thought out that much. And if we look at how it worked in the first few elections, the election of 1792 wasn't all that important because Washington is going to be president. The first couple of elections where we actually have competitive elections, 1796 and 1800, the first real election we have under this, there's 4 well-known candidates, 2 Federalists, the party of many of the authors of the Constitution, 2 Democratic Republicans, which also had some of the founders in there as well. But so there's 4 fairly well-known candidates, and the vote. This is again how it originally was written. You were able to cast 2 votes as an elector, and the idea was the first place person would be the president, second place person would be the president, and they'd be of the same party. But to coordinate, if there's at least 4 well-known candidates, a lot of lesser-known candidates, people voting in their various states, that's a coordination problem. And in that first sort of competitive election, where really there's not a lot of popular voting going on. This is people voting in their states or through the state legislatures. Adams, the Federalist, wins. Jefferson gets second place, so Jefferson ends up getting to be vice president for his political opponent, John Adams, which would be like Sarah Palin being vice president to Obama. So they fixed that. That in 1800, and again, this is an evolving. We result with a constitutional amendment to try to fix this. But then the second kind of competitive election, Jefferson's running. The other, as a Democratic Republican, the next candidate in that party would be Aaron Burr. Adams is running for re-election, and again, the coordinating all these electors voting across all the states produces a tie where they at least got the first place and the second. The idea was that you get the first place and second place person that all these electors are casting 2 votes for to be of the same party, but for various reasons they ended up tying Jefferson and Burr. That goes to the House of Representatives, and then it's the complicated process of the House trying to figure out who's going to be president. Took over a week. I skipped there's great stories about Aaron Burr. I'll skip this. He goes off to be, some sort of mercenary running an army to take over Texas or something, and later ends up having to flee the country and living with Jeremy Bentham in England. But so for this reason, we get the 12th Amendment, and for all intents and purposes, they fix a lot of those problems where I'm talking about, where now you vote as an elector for the president, and you have a second ballot for vice president. I was actually an alternate elector. I got to sit in the Secretary of State's rotunda there, where watch people cast these ballots. But they've got that sorted out. But we still have the process where it's indirect election, where the states decide how these electors are going to be selected. The states decide how these electors are going to be apportioned just based on whatever's going on in the state, either by popular vote, either winner take all by whoever wins the state, or simply by an act of the legislature. It's really not until the 1830s, 1840s that states start moving to the Constitution gives the states the discretion to decide how these electors will be picked. And the states start moving towards having a popular vote that will then deliver those electors. And over the course of the 19th century, I skipped a little bit of the early history here. A lot in the first couple of elections, some states, it was pretty routine for them to split their delegation. So they'd have, some electors for one candidate, some electors for another candidate. I think in the first election or two, New York couldn't even get their act together and cast their electoral ballots on time. So we've kind of fixed or learned a lot of those things. But the trajectory throughout the 19th century was to move towards popular vote and to move towards a winner-take-all system. So whoever won the state's popular vote won all of the electors. And I'll come back to the significance of that. But that was almost a sort of party strategy thing where, if your state is controlled by one party, which a lot of states tend to be politically, and you're splitting the electoral votes up, you're maybe diluting the influence of your state. So state after state kind of saw in their interest to move towards the winner-take-all system. As far as the record, this is depending on the glass is half full, glass is half empty thing. Most of the time, this system has worked in the sense that in the vast majority of time that the popular vote winner ends up being the Electoral College winner. There's famous examples of when it hasn't done that: 2000, 1888, 1876, 1824 maybe, but that's before we really had modern parties and stuff. Only twice has Congress actually had to select the president. And this is an interesting, 1824, 1876, if my notes are right. And that almost happened in 1968, and potentially, kind of close in 1948. I mean, the 2000 election wasn't going to be a tie. Someone's going to win it no matter what happened in Florida. The only times in the 20th century where Congress has actually really looked at the potential for a constitutional amendment was in 1948 and 1968, when it looked like they would potentially be left holding the bag and have to break a tie. I had George Wallace siphoned off a few more electoral votes in 1968. Nobody would have had a majority. The rule is if no one has a majority in the Electoral College, Congress has, every state gets one vote as a delegation, and they really don't, I think, want to do that. So we actually had constitutional amendments in both of those elections passed one house, but not the other, so they didn't get too far. From that standpoint, the glass is half full. It's done a good job of matching the popular vote. The glass is half empty. Some people would say, well, 11 of 35, 36 winners have not had a popular vote majority, but they still are elected president. But again, that you could look at that two ways. That this is a system that manufactures majorities out of fairly thin popular vote, which you can be Ronald Reagan and win with 50% and have a landslide in the Electoral College. You can be Bill Clinton and win with 43% and still have an Electoral College vote that looks like an executive then has some sort of mandate to govern.